Hello, Chris Turner here with Brimstone Fire Protection. Today I'd like to walk you through some of the best practices and the correct use of our EV suppressor system, the electric vehicle fire blanket and the suppressor mister undercarriage nozzle. If you have visited brimstonefireprotection.com, or if you've purchased any of our products and read through the instruction cards, you know that those instructions and those training videos are very thorough and contain all of the information you need to safely deploy the products and the safety measures you need to take while using them. This video is supplementary to those instructions, and my plan is to go through each of the main points of the deployment of a blanket or mister and just remind you of some of the safety features to watch out for and reinforce some of the most important aspects. When you respond to a vehicle fire, you may not know if it's an electric vehicle, an EV, or not. So the first thing you need to do is determine whether it's an electric vehicle and whether the traction batteries, the large batteries that run the motors for the wheels, are involved in the fire or not. You might respond to a fire involving an electric vehicle that doesn't actually involve the batteries. Maybe just the compartment, the passenger compartment, is on fire. And in this case, you'll probably just do a more traditional attack with a hand line and put out the Class A materials. If the traction batteries are involved though, this is where it becomes a more complex situation and you might want to plan on using some more specialized techniques like an EV fire blanket and or an undercarriage nozzle. First and foremost, we want you to be as safe as possible when responding to any vehicle fire. So you know, if you're a firefighter, that the hazard areas on a vehicle fire are normally known as the direct front and direct rear of the fire. This is areas where there can be shock absorbers that are getting heated by the fire and might explode or could rocket and propel and hit someone. So we traditionally teach firefighters to approach from a 45-degree angle and not directly in front of or behind the vehicle. And if you have to go in those areas, to do so for only a small amount of time. Now, when it's an electric vehicle, you also have to realize that there are potential ejections from the batteries, as well as potential jet flames from the batteries that can occur along the sides of the vehicle. So now we have even more potential hazard areas. Tie into that the fact that an electric vehicle may actually drive forward or backwards with really no warning at all and no sound at all. So it's very important to stay again out of those high hazard areas. You might also consider chalking the wheels with either just a 4x4 or a specific heavy-duty wheel chalk. This can help prevent the vehicle from moving forward or backwards and injuring anyone. If the vehicle is very heavily involved in fire, we expect that most fire crews will grab an 1 3/4 hand line and start extinguishing the Class A materials. And this is a very normal tactic to take. Some fire blanket manufacturers say you absolutely must do this before you deploy the blanket, and some say don't use any water at all. And we at Brimstone think that you should use your best professional judgment to decide how heavily involved the fire is and whether the blanket should be deployed right away or whether you should knock down some of that initial fire first. But we also want to think about firefighter safety. The fact that you're approaching the vehicle to deploy the blanket could get you in close proximity to the high heat of the vehicle and therefore might damage your PPE or cause any undue risk. So if you feel like it's more appropriate to knock down the fire first before deploying the blanket, absolutely do so. Remember that the smoke being emitted from the electric vehicle batteries are a mix of potentially hazardous and potentially flammable gases. So you might want to set up a positive pressure fan to blow those gases away from the firefighters as they deploy the blanket, or even use a hand line on a fog setting to push the gases in front of the firefighters as they deploy. This will keep them out of the hazardous smoke, and if a vapor cloud ignition does occur, it'll push that vapor cloud away from them as well. When it comes time to deploy the EV fire blanket, you want to do so in a quick and efficient manner. And remember, our pole system is specifically designed to have a quick deployment method with 2 firefighters to let you get out of those high hazard areas as quickly as possible. As you deploy the blanket, watch for the center line and pull the blanket over the vehicle. In smaller vehicles, you might be using the handles, but in a larger vehicle, you may wish to use our extendable poles. These come standard in the XL sizes and above. The benefit of using the poles is it allows you to get the blanket up and over the taller vehicles, but it also gives you a little bit more of a safe distance between the fire and you. The two firefighters that are deploying the blanket should watch that orange center line as it slides over the vehicle, adjusting to the left or right as needed to keep the blanket as centered on the vehicle as possible. After you've got the blanket fully over the vehicle, make sure you've got a good ground seal around the edges. We like to see a good 3 feet of ground seal if possible, but as long as you have a good flat edge around the entire vehicle, the blanket will do its job. It's going to be limiting the free oxygen, which will help calm the fire. And if there does happen to be a vapor cloud ignition under the blanket, that flat edge will flap up and allow the pressure to be relieved safely. Remember that an electric vehicle fire blanket doesn't do any specific cooling to help prevent the uninvolved batteries from igniting. So it's a good idea to pair an electric vehicle fire blanket with an undercarriage nozzle like our suppressor mister. This is what you'll need in order to cool the uninvolved batteries and interrupt that chain reaction as the fire tries to progress from module to module. From a firefighter's perspective, this is exposure control. You have one house that's totally involved, you're not going to put out that house, you're going to try to keep the house next door from catching on fire. So the chances of you putting out one of the modules within an EV are very, very slim. But if you can keep the others cooled to a point where they don't ignite, you can actually stop that chain reaction and wrap up the incident in a more timely fashion. One nice thing about our mister is that it only flows 10 gallons a minute. So even if you have a limited water supply, you can do a long duration of effective cooling with that 10 gallons a minute, and you'll reduce the amount of runoff that happens. As you're getting ready to deploy the mister, remember that a lot of electric vehicles don't have a lot of ground clearance, and that ground clearance can even be more diminished if the tires have been involved in the fire. The suppressor mister has a very low profile of only 2¼ inches tall, so hopefully you'll be able to identify a spot around the vehicle where that can easily fit. If you're able to determine what part of the battery is involved in fire, either with your thermal imaging camera or by simply watching where the fire is coming from, you can place the mister in such a way that it targets that hot spot, or you can simply target the center line of the vehicle. The mister spray is a very wide angle, so it'll have good coverage over the entire bottom of the vehicle if you can just place it near that center line. The 4 sections of the mister provide a 92-inch reach, so you should be able to place the mister head at the center line of the vehicle while still having the fire hose itself outside of the high heat area of the fire and therefore subjecting it to less potential damage. Once you have the suppressor mister assembled, you'll want to deploy it by sliding it under one of the edges of the blanket. Remember, it's important to only lift the blanket a small amount. If there has been a buildup of vapors underneath the blanket and you still have that ignition source from that burning battery, you don't want to introduce air, oxygen, into that environment and cause a potential vapor cloud ignition. You can use one of our extendable poles or maybe a pike pole to lift the blanket just ever so slightly to allow another firefighter to slide the mister underneath that edge. It's also a good idea to turn on the mister before deploying it so that it can provide some additional mist and cooling and therefore some additional protection to the firefighter. Remember that true firefighting mist being produced by the mister is not only cooling the uninvolved batteries, but is helping to mitigate a potential vapor cloud ignition. It does this by cooling the vapor cloud, which therefore requires more energy to start a potential vapor cloud ignition, and if an ignition does occur, the water droplets present within the cloud have an ability to strip the energy from the wavefront and cause a much less violent reaction. One additional benefit of an undercarriage nozzle is many times the batteries, as they burn, they will produce holes in the undercarriage of the vehicle. Typically these are constructed with a 1/4 inch thick piece of aluminum, and those strong blowtorch type fires will blow holes in or melt holes in that aluminum, and as you place an undercarriage nozzle under the vehicle, there is an avenue for the water to get up into that battery casing. Therefore, we can find that cooling can actually happen within the battery case as well as to the adjacent modules. The yellow deployment strap that you used for the quick deployment method to help unroll the blanket can be used as a cinch strap if needed. We normally recommend that this cinch strap be used only in high wind environments or when there's a potential for the blanket to become dislodged. If you choose to use the cinch strap, make sure that you put it just underneath the bumper level of the vehicle. We don't want you to put it very low and at the bottom of the tires, which could trap the vapors and lead to a potential much more violent deflagration event. Keeping the cinch strap up higher allows for the gases to expel out of the bottom flap of the blanket if necessary. Remember that in most EVs, the batteries are on the underside of the vehicle, so keeping that cinch strap high allows for potential venting of the gases if needed. We also recommend the use of the cinch strap to keep the blanket on the vehicle while being towed to the salvage yard. Keeping the blanket in place while en route to the salvage yard can be a big benefit if the batteries happen to start on fire again, and using the cinch strap will help keep that blanket in place while in transit. Once you have the entire system in place, it's time to monitor the event from a safe distance. You'll want to be using your thermal imaging camera to detect any hot spots and continuing fire events. You'll want to be listening for sounds of the battery ignitions like popping or hissing or the sounds of jet flame. Those things are all signs that the batteries are still burning. While we are trying to cool the uninvolved batteries, again, there's little chance that we're going to be putting out the batteries that are still involved, so we need to let those get consumed. This may take up to 30 minutes per module. So what I would recommend is, as you're monitoring and listening and watching, wait for a period of 30 to 60 minutes since the last time of fire, since you've seen the last vapor cloud ignition, since you've seen the last active fire, or since you've heard the last sign of an active battery fire. After that 30 to 60 minute period has expired, now you need to decide whether it's time to take the blanket off or whether you're just going to keep the blanket in place and let it stay on the vehicle while it goes to the salvage yard. During that monitoring period, there's no reason to approach the blanket or to lift the edge to inspect for fire underneath it. Doing so will only add oxygen to the environment and can lead to a potential vapor cloud ignition. If you've been monitoring the incident for that 30 to 60 minute period since the last sign of fire, and you've decided that it's time to remove the blanket, we also want you to do the blanket removal in as safe a way as possible. Again, we're still watching for potential vapor cloud ignitions, so we want to do all of these tactics such that it will put the firefighters at a distance from any potential vapor cloud ignition that might occur. So when you're going to remove the blanket, one course of action is to grab the handles on one end of the blanket and simply slide the blanket off the vehicle. Remember, while you're removing the blanket, you want to try to keep the edge of the blanket as low to the ground as possible so that any vapor cloud ignition doesn't escape where you're standing. Using our extendable poles can really help as well to keep that blanket as low to the ground as possible. Again, the goal is to keep firefighters as far away from any potential vapor cloud ignition as possible. So sliding off the blanket using this technique should only cause vapor cloud ignition potential at the far end of the blanket, not where the firefighters are standing. If the vehicle has been involved in a crash and there are jagged pieces of metal or there are areas of burn through that would make sliding the blanket off the vehicle impossible, an alternate technique could be to tie some ropes to two of the handles and, at a distance, pull the ropes so that you can slide the blanket up and over itself. We call this the peel-off technique. But again, we're placing distance between the firefighters and the blanket by using the ropes, and therefore any potential vapor cloud ignition should be a distance away from the firefighters, and there's some space between the blanket and the firefighter where that vapor cloud ignition can vent itself safely. So I hope this video has helped explain a lot of the safety steps involved with deploying either the suppressor blanket or the suppressor mister, how they can work together to be an effective 1-2 punch against an electric vehicle fire, and ways for you to be as safe as possible. Please check out our website, brimstonefireprotection.com, and you can also feel free to reach out to any of us on the team if you've got any additional questions.